This is the eve of the State of the Union. There is this historic job growth the White House is selling, and then the rapidly developing clash in Washington as we're getting new details about what the true Republican agenda may be in the Congress or in the people running for president. There are prominent conservatives that are reviving an idea long left for dead, and interestingly one that Barack Obama himself warned about on the midterm campaign trail. The idea, bringing back what was once a Bush-era plan to change or gut Social Security.
The president tonight, we're told, will say much more about how he plans to reshape Social Security.
The system is headed toward bankruptcy. I earned capital in the campaign, political capital, and now I intend to spend it.
Strengthen it, improve it, do not privatize it.
Even though some consider it, the third rail of American politics.
Some are afraid to touch it, some don't want to touch it, some provide excuses not to touch it.
Do you want to touch it?
Even in friendly territory, it's fair to say he's finding that his plan is going to be a hard sell.
The problem is that the stock market could do badly in the future.
A dumb idea. I'm not convinced of any plan. I'm not convinced of the president's plan.
The last voice there, a Southern Republican senator. If you lived through this, you may remember the backlash, the street protests, voters who were being told that the markets do great, put it all in the markets, and maybe it'll be even easier or more profitable than how Social Security works as a government program. But the thing about markets is they go up and they go down. And people, ultimately, most people, including in red states, were very concerned about the idea that you would have to just ride that wave to insecurity when the whole point of Social Security is the security part. You heard Bush there talking about the capital that he thought he earned. Well, he tried spending it, but he backed down. It didn't work. All that back in 2005. So we have lived through all that, and we provide that context because so many members of Congress remember that. This is their area of politics. They know that. And yet here we are in 2023, and Mike Pence, thinking about running for president, is now basically kind of caught, if you want to call it that, in leaked video where he's talking to a business group in the last few days about bringing this back, about the Republican Party doing what Obama warned in the midterms they might do and what some Republicans denied, which is try to go at and privatize or gut your Social Security.
There are modest reforms in entitlements that can be done without disadvantaging anybody at the point of the need. And actually, I think the day could come when we can replace the New Deal with a better deal. Literally give younger Americans the ability to take a portion of their Social Security withholdings and put that into a private savings account.
Privatize it, or part of it. Pence doing this at a time where he's talking to House Republicans, where, remember, of course, he used to serve the Republican Study Committee, about all this and pushing Bush's plan, or a Bush-style plan. The same group of House Republicans back at it in 2023. So it's all linked up because some of these ideas were only shelved because they were unpopular, and yet the pivot never happened. They're trying to bring it back, or raise the age, or privatize part of it. One House Republican confirming the party is looking at, quote, general cuts to food assistance, talk about that New Deal type change. And then this all fits into the fight that we've been covering about the debt and the spending, ransoming the economy, Republicans basically saying that if they can't get drastic cuts, they might try to ruin America's credit. Now, Speaker McCarthy, for his part, who does have to keep an eye on the next election, is saying they will not target Social Security. They aren't being very specific about the other cuts they want. And, well, we've seen that sometimes he's not always in charge anyway of what the caucus is up to. We saw that in the speaker race. So that is the context tonight as everyone gets ready for a big State of the Union tomorrow. And I want to bring in the Washington Post's Libby Casey and the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg. Libby, what do you see in some of this set of ideas being apparently revived?
Kevin McCarthy gave this pre-buttal to the State of the Union tonight, but he didn't actually say any cuts he'd like to make. He just doubled down on this idea that spending has been crazy, with no acknowledgement, of course, of how the deficit ballooned under the Trump administration. And while he said he's not going to touch Social Security or Medicare, there are a lot of simmering ideas in the caucus that would suggest otherwise. I mean, Mike Pence was reminiscing fondly in that video you just showed, Ari, of the Bush years and the conversation and how they were really hashing this out and what they could do. And so he's remembering that as a starting point. You have other figures like Matt Gaetz, who are trying to go after programs for the most vulnerable Americans, like Medicaid. And then, in a fascinating twist, you have Donald Trump warning Republicans, don't touch it. But I have to point out, Ari, that his former director of OMB, the Office of Budget and Management, has come out with his own plan. And he's saying that there are trims and cuts that can be made in areas like benefits to disability veterans and other areas that Americans are likely not going to find tenable. When you tell people you're going to go after aid to veterans, it doesn't usually go over well.
Michelle?
I think that, there was this fantasy among some people after Donald Trump's election that the Republican Party had sort of turned a corner on austerity economics, had turned a corner on its essential fealty to Wall Street. You hear the Republican Party demagogue against Wall Street a lot, but they, when it comes to legislation, they're usually very ready to do its bidding. And I think, it's not surprising that Donald Trump would warn against this, because this was partly how he put together what was kind of a new coalition within the Republican Party that included a lot of downscale former Democratic voters. But I think what you see with so many people in the Republican Party is that they just can't quit.